Hello, everyone, and welcome to Understanding the SAT and the ACT. Today is March 20th, 2024, and I'm joined today with three fabulous panelists who we will introduce here in a moment. As we get started, I just want to let you know a little bit about Education USA. Education USA is a U.S. Department of State network of more than 400 international advising centers around the world, and we provide accurate, comprehensive, and current information about studying in post-secondary institutions in the United States. If you want to learn more about our network, check out educationusa.state.gov. Here in Canada, we have one advising center. It's in Ottawa, and I am your Education USA advisor. My name is Jenica Heim, and we provide free advising resources. There's a lot on our website. You can go ahead and take a look at that and our contact information there, educationusacanada.ca. Take a look at us on social media. And I'll go ahead and, if you're not already following us on Instagram, I do recommend it. We offer free webinars like the one you're in today, right now. And very excitingly, we will be having an in-person fair in Ottawa on May 1st from 6 to 9 p.m. And you'll definitely hear more about that if you join our outreach list. You can always email me at ottawa@educationusa.org. So today we have some chat features here. So you can go ahead and in the chat, feel free to say hello. Feel free to shout out where you're joining us from. And then you'll also be able to interact in some other ways. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a poll. This poll is just asking you what test you might be planning on taking. Are you planning on taking the SAT, the ACT, both exams, or neither? Maybe you're just, I guess maybe if you're here as a teacher, educator, someone curious, you might be in the neither category. But as far as students are concerned, I would expect an A, B, or C. All right. We are joined here today with three presenters who are going to help us move through this information. They are all admissions professionals. So they will get started by each telling you about both themselves and their universities that they represent. And then they're each going to give a presentation on comparing the SAT and ACT, a little bit about how the digital SAT has how the SAT has changed to the digital SAT, some tips for preparing for the SAT and ACT, admissions requirements at each of their universities, and then we'll finish up with a discussion about test optional policies. So when they each talk about their admissions requirements, we'll transition right into what does it mean to be test optional and answer some of those questions as well. All right, so without further ado, I am going to pass it to our first speaker today. Aaron, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you very much. It's great to be here today. My name is Aaron Bixler, and I'm at Miami University in Ohio. And as I like to do when I'm talking with the group is to put a map up because it can be a little confusing that there's a Miami in the state of Ohio. So I like to get that clear early on. We've actually been there for quite some time. We've been a university since 1809. We're located in a town called Oxford, which is also a little confusing. Oxford is a little college town of about 10,000 people, excluding students. We're about 1 hour by car from Cincinnati, Ohio, which is the closest metro area. There's a little over 2 million people in kind of the greater Cincinnati area. So Miami University in Ohio. What Miami's probably best known for is its undergraduate teaching. So we've been rated one of the top public universities in the US for teaching undergraduate students. And what that means for you as an undergraduate student really is that from your first semester, from your first year, you're going to have access to full professors, to experts in the field teaching your courses. And that really continues on for all 4 years of your bachelor's degree program. So our professors, they come to Miami University because they love to teach undergraduate students. Certainly they do research, they do publications, but teaching is kind of the center of our mission. And that's a little bit unusual for an institution our size. We have about 19,000 total students. So kind of, we say it's a mid-sized school, but kind of on the larger end of mid-sized, but with an undergraduate focus. About 16,000 of those 19,000 students are bachelor's degree students. Then the other 3,000 students are master's and PhD students. Our students come from almost every US state and from over 100 different countries, including we only have about, I think maybe about 20 students right now from Canada. So we need to work on that. Our 16,500 bachelor's degree students, they study over 120 different majors, and they're divided up into these 5 academic divisions that you see here. The great thing I think about the US, studying in the US, and Miami does a good job with that, is that you can combine your interests. Like you can have a major in the College of Engineering and Computing, could be a computer science major, for example, and get a minor in our nationally ranked business school and get a finance minor. So you're able to really combine your interest in very unique ways. And it's something we really encourage. About 60% of our students do a double major or a major and at least one minor. So even though our majors are divided up into these 5 categories, you can really kind of pick and choose and select from more than one. So I think that's really something that is unique to the US and that we encourage. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it on.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And up next, AJ.
All right. Thank you, Jenica. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening, maybe, getting close to that for some of you. And I always like starting with this picture because that's pretty typical of a day on Santa Clara's campus. That's what it looks like today. I just got back from the gym a couple minutes ago. It's about 70 degrees, looking like that. Pretty nice. And so if you've heard of us before, we are in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the way I kind of really break that down is sort of a big triangle of 3 major cities: San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, which are surrounded by a bunch of little satellite suburbs and towns, of which Santa Clara is one of those. I live in the downtown San Jose area and could ride my bike to work if I wanted to. Palo Alto, where Stanford is about 20 minutes up the road. Oakland, if you're driving, 40 minutes up the road. San Francisco, about 45. In the other direction, our closest beach, Santa Cruz, about 30 or 40 minutes to the south. So pretty ideally located, centrally located. Those are actual times and distances, right? We operate a little differently from Southern California, less congested, less people up here. We can get around pretty easily. And so we like that. If you've ever heard that term, Silicon Valley, right? The capital really for technology for not only the West Coast, not the US, but for the world. That's where we are. That's our backyard. That's our backyard. That's our playground. And again, I take for granted you've heard that term in terms of the nickname for the Valley. What you might not be aware of is that we're the oldest school in the state. And so we were here before this valley was known for all those companies at the bottom of the page there. But with the growth of those industries, those are areas academically that we are very highly regarded, right? So in your Princeton guidebooks, your US News and World Reports, Fisk guides, and all those kinds of publications, the areas you'll see Santa Clara very highly regarded: engineering, business, and law at the graduate level, but we offer a whole lot more than that, right? We're a comprehensive school grounded in the liberal arts and all of that. In this area, you might have heard, in California in general, but the Bay Area in particular, one of the more expensive areas and regions in the country to just exist. You kind of have to be productive where we are and our students are. As you can see, about 80% of our students graduate with at least one internship. Our graduates in the top 1% of salaries at graduation and throughout their career, and all of that. Just again, it ain't all about money, but around here, you got to be productive. Truly a national school. Only about half the students are from California. The rest come from all over. The Bay Area, just like Southern California, New York, and parts of the East Coast, one of the more diverse and mingling areas of the country. As a university, we try to reflect that. We are a Jesuit school, right? Which kind of speaks to why we are the oldest school and our oldest institution of higher learning in the state. The Jesuits are a Catholic order of priests, been around for about 500 years, known for valuing education, social justice, doing for others, answering those larger societal global questions and things like that. And so grounded in that, and what I really appreciate about the Jesuit approach, hands down in my experience, one of the more open-minded approaches that you'll find in terms of religious studies at the higher ed level. They question, they challenge. It's no dogma anyone's saying, we know the answer, follow this. Just an aspect of being and living, all that folks kind of want you to spend some time experiencing. And so 3 theology courses over the 4 years. At Santa Clara, upwards of 150 to choose from to fulfill those. And so that aspect really is what you make of it. We are a medium-sized school. And, as my colleague was saying earlier, we're kind of down towards the lower end of that medium size, right? So we're about 6,100 undergraduate students, 3,100 graduate students. You see our class sizes average, and student faculty ratios. It's a smaller environment, right? So population wise, medium size, smaller, or all of that, academically smaller. And we're on the quarter system, so things move quickly, which ties into the fact, I think the size and the speed that we have one of the higher retention rates, meaning continuation from first to second year, and one of the higher 4-year, not 6-year, but 4-year graduation rates in the country. Folks come in, they figure things out, they're pretty productive here, and then they move on. And so I'll pass it on to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. And on to you, Christy.
All right, thank you very much, and happy to be with you today. I'm representing the University of Northern Iowa. My name is Dr. Christy Marcassani, and at UNI, we have students coming from all around the world, over 56 countries, to be part of our population of 9,000 students. So just like my other colleagues, we all come from medium-sized schools, so there must be a trend here about medium-sized, because they really are a perfect combination of having lots of options, but yet also having a very personalized environment, smaller classes, opportunities to get contact with your faculty and have a really amazing experience. University of Northern Iowa started in 1876 and has been ranked one of the top public regional universities in the Midwest for many years. So we really feel like we're doing a lot of things right by our students. In addition, we have 160 majors and minors. So we have a lot of options for you to choose from for your undergraduate studies. And pretty much, you might know in the US, there's so much flexibility. So we have students who do combinations of business and science, or technology and social science. So that's an option for you. And we have people here to really help you figure out what the best bet is for your future. In addition, we have a beautiful campus. It's a 940-acre park-like campus. And so you'll see here, this is our 65 buildings that we have on campus, and they're all within walking distance. So you don't have to take a bus to get anywhere. You're just on this campus. It's a park-like campus, so it's green and trees and maybe a little squirrels and bunnies running around, and just a lot of students having a great experience on the campus. Everything that you need will be on the campus, but we're also located in a very nice city of Cedar Falls, which is a college town. Very safe, very friendly area, a good environment for you to do your studies. And I'll just finish up by talking a little bit about some of the things we're really proud of. First of all, 94% of our graduates depart with experience in their field. And what that means is that you're not just coming to sit in the classroom and do homework. You're also going to be able to engage outside the classroom. We have clubs and organizations. We have chances to do research. In fact, we have a very high percentage of our undergraduates who get to do research because we don't have big graduate programs. And then we definitely have internships. In fact, we have more internship offers than we have students to take those offers. So our students are in demand. So if you want to go out and get experience, that's going to help you when you apply for jobs or when you apply for then graduate school afterwards. So this formula seems to be working because 96% of our graduates find success within 6 months of graduation. So we know that our students are out there doing great things. Some of my international students I've just talked to recently, they're teaching at universities, they're working for Amazon, we're a big accounting school, they're working in the big 4 accounting firms. So there's a real pathway here for you to be able to do some great things. So thank you, and we're excited to talk more about the subject of the webinar today.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Before we get into each of your individual topics, the results of the poll are in. So there's about 15% of you here just enjoying today's subject matter. 55% plan to take the SAT, 2% the ACT, and 27% both exams. So we are skewing very heavily towards SAT. Hopefully, as we get started with comparing the SAT and ACT, that might encourage some of you that are maybe less familiar with the ACT to maybe consider this option if you feel it's going to be a good fit for you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Aaron to start us off on this topic.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of information about both tests, a little SAT and ACT 101, and talk a little bit about some of their features and how, which, hopefully give maybe some insights on which one may be a better fit for you. So the SAT is divided into two sections, the reading and writing section, and then the math section. The reading and writing section is going to measure, reading comprehension and reasoning skills, and focus on, reading selected passages. It's a little over an hour, about 64 minutes. It's composed of two 32-minute modules. The mathematics section measures algebra, geometry, and trigonometry, but also tests general problem solving and data analysis skills. So slightly longer, composed of two 35-minute modules for a total of 70 minutes. So most questions in the SAT are going to be multiple choice questions, although I've heard that the new digital SAT has some math questions where you actually will enter in an answer. The current SAT also has no penalty for guessing, so if you don't know, you can take a guess. For scoring, each section, the reading and writing section and the math section, can range from 200 to 800 for that section. And then your overall score is determined by adding your scores from both sections together. So two sections score from 400 to 1600. The ACT, on the other hand, has four sections. It's got an English section, a math section, a reading section, and a science section. And so the English section is about 45 minutes. And in that section, you review short texts and essays to kind of assess your writing, reading, and language skills. The mathematics section is about an hour. And the ACT says that it basically is going to test knowledge that students should have through grade 11, mathematics in the US. So that's kind of the base math knowledge that they're looking for the math section. The reading section's a little bit shorter. It's about 35 minutes. And students, kind of similar to the SAT and to the English section in the ACT, they're going to read, sections and answer questions about them, trying to process information from multiple sources. And then finally, something that makes the ACT a little unique, I think, is the science section. And that's also 35 minutes. And it doesn't test specific scientific knowledge per se, but more is looking to try to assess your reasoning and problem solving skills that are be required in the natural sciences. Like the SAT, there's no penalty for guessing in the ACT. However, it's scored very differently. So each section on the ACT can be scored from 1 to 36. And then after you have a score for each section, those scores are actually averaged and rounded to the nearest whole number to get your overall score. So each section scores 1 to 36, and your overall score on the ACT is also 1 to 36. I will point out here that for both the SAT and the ACT, for students who take one test more than once, you can do something they call super scoring, and both tests allow for this. And many schools, most schools, I would say, will utilize this. And super scoring is where you can use scores from different test dates and combine those to increase your overall score. So, for example, on the SAT, if I had a 500 on the English section and a 600 on the math section the first time I took it, and a 600 on the English section and a 500 on the math section the second time I took it, I could take both 600s and use that as my overall score, which would give me a 100-point increase. When you're looking at, just some quick facts when you're looking at whether to take the SAT or the ACT. Most schools accept both, especially here where I am in the Midwest. We see both all the time. We see probably a little more of the ACT than the SAT, but we do accept both. And then we actually have a concordance table that we use to compare scores. Being in the Midwest, we will basically put everything into terms of the ACT. So that's just what we're most familiar with. But again, we don't have a preference per se on which one to take. So it's really becomes up to the student. Both tests cover reading and writing and math. But the ACT, as I mentioned, covers more areas. So if you're really into math, you might want to think about the SAT, because half of your SAT score is math, where in the ACT, only 25% of your score is math. Another big difference between the tests is kind of the pace of the test. The SAT indicates that it provides 68% more time per question than the ACT. So maybe more time for question, more time to think for a question about the question, whereas the ACT covers a lot of area, a lot of questions quickly. So it's a little more quick, rapid fire, I guess, a little more quick pace than the SAT. And as we'll talk about later, in terms of prepping for the test, there are practice tests and lots of ways to prepare for them. And we'll get into that for a little bit. But I just wanted to give you all a little bit of background information about both tests, how they're the same, how they're different, and how they're scored.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And a question came in about, can schools see the number of attempts you make on the SAT or ACT? Do you want to speak to score choice for just a moment?
Sure, I believe so. I think you can send all of your scores. I would encourage, like AJ mentioned in the chat, to send all of your scores so that we can super score them. We don't have any kind of penalty or other, there's no real downside to sending all of them. I kind of see just the best test scores by the time it gets to me. So I'm not sure. I think we only see that most of the time. So we don't really see all the scores from all the sessions as an application reader.
Sure. So SAT has something called score choice, and I believe ACT has something similar, but not every university will allow you to use this feature. So just as AJ mentioned, do your research on the specific policies of each university you're applying to. And as everyone's mentioned so far, it's usually to your benefit to send your scores if you take it more than once. And to also just note about the actual websites for the exams, if you head over to the handout section, we have links there for those, for the test maker websites, as well as some practice. All right, we'll go ahead and move to the next topic, the digital SAT. AJ, tell us what we need to know.
Sure, yeah, and just a quick note, I'll touch on the score choice option, right? Which, quite frankly, most institutions really want to put students in the best position possible. So, that's why, we kind of default to students should really send all their scores, and then we'll super score them. Some institutions will only super score between a specific test, SAT or ACT. Some, like Santa Clara, we will super score between different sections between the SAT and ACT, right? What ends up happening with score choice is that sometimes that can hold up the sending of all your scores, because if you're taking multiple tests and you've indicated score choice, they're going to hold off on sending any of that to the school until you've completed all the tests, right? So just something to think about. But quickly, the new digital SAT. So, and I actually just rotated off of a national sort of advisory board for the College Board. So this was, they were going through this process and coming up with this, during my time there. So it was very interesting to see the sort of inner workings of it. But essentially, introduced internationally and last year, domestically this year, right? And so very new, basically paper and pen out the door. Now, again, if folks have certain, learning differences or need that accommodation, then that can be arranged. But by and large, paper and pencil gone, it's all digital. You all are pretty technically savvy these days, this generation, so it shouldn't really be an issue for you. More secure, right? And so each test is individual, right? And so questions will be randomized and things like that. So no two students sitting next to each other or in other test centers will be taking the exact same test in terms of the numbering and sequencing of questions that they're taking. So more secure in that way. If folks, remember the news over the last few years, there were in different regions of the world some pretty big security issues with the test. And so this test in particular definitely takes a look at that and tries to address that. Prior to the test, you would download an application called Blue Book, whether onto your own device that you're bringing into a test center, or if it's a school device, the school would usually do that. And so a pretty secure platform, which basically shuts down your ability to Google anything and that kind of thing on your own device. Shorter, right? And so again, you definitely want to make sure that you've charged your device if you're bringing in one, because the entire test with breaks and all that will take you about 3 hours, but the actual test itself should be about 2 hours, right? So it's about an hour shorter than the previous test, easier to proctor. Not a really a concern of you all's, but there were a lot of just sort of cumbersome issues in terms of folks finding spaces at high schools and things like that, and domestically, internationally, throughout the world, and so easier to proctor. And that has been the response that College Board has received over this last year or so that folks have been taking it. Both from the students, it's been easier and quicker and more relevant, and for the folks giving the test, a little bit easier to do. Shorter reading passages, right? So for folks who are the adults on the call, if you remember taking the SAT and reading these long passages, we had to come back and answer five or six questions on that. That's gone, right? So for students today, shorter reading passages, more relevant and current reading passages, varied topics and things like that, with just a question or two that is in response to that reading section. So hopefully, in terms of short-term memory and all of that and retention, it makes it a little bit easier for folks. Digital tools built in, right? As my colleague was saying, the ability to highlight different sections, to go back and bookmark them. There's a built-in graphing calculator for the math sections. You also get scratch paper and things like that, but different tools available as well. And so those are the sort of main changes with the SAT, but hopefully you'll find it a little bit easier to take. All right.
Thank you, AJ. And finally, we're going to move into test-taking tips. Handing it over to Christy.
All right, well, before I begin my tips, I do need to give you a little bit of trivia, which is that the ACT was invented in Iowa. So as you're deciding between SAT and ACT, you know that the ACT has an Iowa connection. However, I'll let you know that we have students take both, and it really does not matter either way, even though we do have a connection with the ACT. All right, so let's talk about how to prepare for your exams. A lot of times when students think about these exams, they think about, okay, I need to stuff as much knowledge into my head as possible. And I want to kind of give you a sense that some of your approach to exam should be not about what the information or knowledge you need, but about figuring out what to expect from the exam. So this way, when you go to take the exam, you're not distracted or discouraged or confused by the exam itself. If you have a good feel for what to expect, what you need to do, I think that's a real recipe for success. So looking at the exams and trying to figure out, okay, what is the format of the exam? And again, we're talking both about a digital version and an in-person version. So you need to know, okay, what is the format that I'm taking? What is the setting that I will be in? So, knowing where you need to go, when you need to be there, what it's going to look like, what are the rules that you're going to have to follow? Also, how long do you have for sections for the whole test? I find sometimes students are like, oh, I didn't get a chance to finish that section. So you need to strategize and understand what you're going to be needing to do, and then what your approach is going to be to getting that done. And then also understanding how it's scored. We talked a little bit about this, is it better to guess or should you not? So knowing what the exam is all about. And this is pretty easy to find, and we'll talk a little bit about this because there's a lot of resources out there that will talk about what the exam looks like, have you take a practice exam. So those are going to be good things to do. But before we talk about that, another suggestion I have is that you need to come up with a realistic study schedule. So some students, I know probably no one on this webinar, but some students like to procrastinate and cram. Somehow they think if they spend 10 hours the night before reading through everything, it's going to stay in their head and not get lost. But actually, all the studies show that cramming leads to higher stress, and lower scores. So what you need to do is back up however many months that you have to prepare and think about how you're going to start preparing. What's your schedule? Are you going to spend, so many hours a week? Are you going to put aside times, and every so often do another practice exam? The more organized you are going in, the better off it's going to be. And again, there's only so much that you can learn within a short period. So you really need to strategize and know what you need to be looking and reviewing. So another idea a lot of students do is creating study aids. When I was young, we had little things called flashcards. They were little pieces of paper we wrote on. I don't know if they exist anymore, but this concept can also be one that you can use electronically, because there's websites out there. One is Quizlet.com. You can go in and you can create your own flashcards. So this means that they're a little exam, a little test for you, a question, or you need to define something, and then it has the answer on the other side or in another space that you can go check. So go out there and look for resources of good ways that will help you study and understand. I talked about this before, and that was to take practice exams. I think this is one of the best things you can do. So again, you're prepared, you know what to expect. You're not studying the wrong types of things. You're knowing how to approach different questions. So I'll be sharing with you some of those resources. So you're going to want to take a look at that. And then my last tip in this section is to eat well, exercise, and rest. This may seem like common sense or maybe a little silly, but it's really makes a difference. When you're tired or sick or hungry, you are not paying attention, you're not focusing. So you need to be at 100% for this time that you're taking these exams. So you need to do everything you can to stay healthy and to keep your mind clear. So remember that as you're leading up to your exam, that these are important things as well. Now, I want to give you some SAT prep resources, and some of these also have ACT, so they go for both. But sometimes some students think that you have to pay to be able to get support. And there are some probably legitimate things you can pay for to be able to help you prepare for your exams. However, there are a lot of free resources, so you really shouldn't have to pay for anything. These are some of the resources that I found. There's also the website is down at the bottom, and then in the handouts, there's examples of some of these that you may want to look at. But just take a look, like collegeboard.org is a great website. They'll give you a question of the day so you can test yourself. There's sample questions. There's little tutorials you can do. So these are great study aids and might be perfect for what you need. The Khan Academy is interesting because they personalize practice based on your diagnostic test results. So you do a test, they see where your weaknesses are or where you need more work, and then they come back and help you in those areas. So I think that's really smart to focus your time on the areas you need. Princeton Review also has personalized tips you can use. McGraw-Hill has problem-solving videos. And so some of you maybe really respond to videos, and so this might be a nice way. Test prep practices do have a list of the top SAT prep books. And, if you do want to invest in a book, some people do. That's how some people learn better. This might give you an idea of what's best for you. And then Varsity Tutors have the old school idea of flashcards, but they have it more accessible for you online. So you may want to check out some of those. So I think at the end, it's find what works for you, find the best schedule for you to be able to systematically lead up, study, prepare, and feel confident and ready for your exam. And good luck.
Thank you so much for all of those great resources. There's a few questions that have come in, and I'm going to rapid fire answer a bunch of them just because it seems like there's a number that are overlapping. What is a good SAT or ACT score? The score that's going to get you into your top choice school or program. As AJ mentioned, you should be researching that. I recommend the College Board itself has averages, basically score ranges for every school that you might want to consider. And so taking a practice test can help you understand what your initial score might be. And then you can look up schools that have that score in their range, and then you can see what you need to shoot for. So taking a practice test first, as Christy was mentioning, is the best way to take the mystery out of the test and then start preparing yourself. So a few questions came in. Are there specific dates to take the test? Yes, there's about 7 dates a year for each of the SAT and ACT, and they're usually once a month, but obviously not every month. So definitely look them up on the website as far as what the schedule is. The next ACT is in April. The next SAT is in May. You do not have to have learned any U.S. history or anything like that in order to take the test. There isn't anything you'll be penalized on. However, there might be materials that are learned earlier in Canada or later than they are in the States. So practicing for the test is very important to make sure you have all the base knowledge and you're prepared. Universities receive your results when you pay to have them sent to each individual university, although you do get 4 free sends when you register. So definitely take advantage of those. Everyone after that costs $13 to send an official score. There are fees for taking the tests. They're about $150 each, somewhere around that. I can't remember the exact one. Please feel free to jump in if you know the exact cost of the test. And the materials really target grade 11. They go up in math through grade 11 functions. So I do highly recommend that you have a solid grade 11 math base before you consider taking the SAT or the ACT. All right, the rest of the questions we will keep until the Q&A. Let's go ahead and get some information about each university's admissions requirements, and then so we can learn a little bit more about how the SAT and ACT are also used within the admissions process. All right, Aaron, you're up first.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the application process to Miami University, and then what we're looking for after students apply to be admitted. So applying to Miami University or to other U.S. universities is usually pretty straightforward. We're all a little different, which makes it tough, but we have a lot of commonalities. At Miami, the common application is something that most of our students use. So there is an essay component there. We have our own international application that students can opt to use as well. But if you're applying to a lot of different schools in the US, the common application makes a lot of sense. We're test optional. So for our purposes, the SAT and ACT is totally optional. As I'll say in a minute, you can be admitted and receive a scholarship without submitting the SAT or ACT. If your first language isn't English, if you've maybe just moved to Canada or to the US from another country, proof of English proficiency may be required. There are some documents we require for basically issuing the I-20, which is the paper you'll need to come into the US on a student status. And that would be like financial documentation, passport. But the main thing is for the application will be your high school records, your transcripts. Ideally, students send us their academic records for grades 9 to 11 because they're still in grade 12. And that's going to be kind of, especially without a test score, that's going to be the main thing we're going to review for your application. We also will ask for a recommendation letter. It's not required, but it's very much encouraged. So once the student's applied, we're going to look at all the things they've submitted to review their application. So the academic criteria, the main thing is going to be that those grades you've earned in school, starting with grade 9, will basically calculate an equivalent US GPA based on the grades you've earned at your school here in Canada. Again, if your first language is English, you don't have to be concerned about the English proficiency scores, but those are listed there if your first language is not English and proof of English proficiency is required. The SAT and ACT is optional, as I mentioned. So most of our students will submit a test score. Not most of our international students, but most of our students overall will submit a score, and that will be used if the student's submitted. So being test optional is different than being test blind. So when you're a test blind school, you don't consider the SAT or ACT at all. For us, if you submit it and you ask that we consider it, we will. So you can actually send your scores to us, as one of those 4 free ones. And if you don't like your score, you can ask that we not consider it. Or if you do, you can leave it in there and we'll consider it. So it's totally optional, but if you submit it, it will be considered. A lot of U.S. universities will say that they do holistic review, and Miami's no exception. So what that means is we'll look at everything you submit and ask us to consider: your transcripts, your recommendation letters, your essays, your activities. All of that will go into the final admission and scholarship consideration. And then finally, there are some programs, for us, it's the business school, that are more competitive than general university admission. So they're going to have a little bit higher standards in all of those categories. Then there's some that will have extra requirements. And those are usually creative arts majors, things like submitting a portfolio for architecture or doing an audition for music. So all those will go into the final admission decision for Miami University. That's it for me.
Fabulous. We'll go ahead and pass it straight over to AJ.
All righty. So a lot of similarities here. So hopefully this is short and sweet. But yes, we are also a Common App school, and that is the only application that we utilize. There are close to around 900 U.S. schools, at least, that are on the Common App. So again, as my colleague was saying, hopefully that makes it simpler, simplified. What you want to be careful of is in the Common App itself, which has an essay and additional information section and all that, mentioning any particular school. You want to hold off on that. And then if you would like to say, school X, Y, or Z in particular, then you want to hold off on those and include that in those supplemental sections for a particular school, right? Because the Common App goes everywhere. Because the Common App says I'm applying to school, these schools, these supplements are to the specific schools, right? And so for us, you apply directly to one of our three undergraduate schools. So the College of Arts and Sciences, which is our, again, sort of our liberal arts grounding, close to 40 different majors to choose from there. More popular programs here: political science, communication, psychology, biology, anything, we have strong programs in the arts as well: art, theater, music, dance. Programs we're not known for, but programs we do take very seriously. The business school is about a quarter of our student body. And again, we're in the Silicon Valley. So business, engineering is kind of what we're known for. And then, our School of Engineering. And so in terms of, our ranges in the middle 50%, if you've heard that term, for our three schools, that information is right there. We have overall, last year our admit rate was about 42%. This year is about 48%. That said, sort of the counterintuitive part to that, for anybody who's saying, okay, well, that's a pretty high admit rate, our averages are actually pretty high, right? Especially for schools that folks would consider similar to us, right? In part because of where we are, what we're known for, and who that attracts. And so not too much varies in terms of, what we look at compared to my colleague in Miami of Ohio. Letters of recommendation, that's something we require. Don't put too much emphasis on that. I tell students all the time, you're not going to get into school X, Y, or Z because your essay was great and the letter of record was amazing. Really, academically, you got to be in the ballpark. These other pieces just give us more context into who you are, what you do. Do you have positive pursuits outside the classroom, right? There's no one extracurricular that we hold above all else. We just want to know that you're going to be okay outside the classroom and know what to do with yourself, right? We have a lot going on here. We're a very residential campus. Are you going to add to that? And so, again, truly test optional. Consider the same for admission, for any type of academic or merit-based monies, regardless of whether or not a score is submitted. And these dates right here let you know. There's an early time period, regular time period. There's binding, non-binding, all that kind of stuff. You really just have to make the best decision for yourself and your family, right? If finances are going to be a major concern, which operates a little differently in Santa Clara, then don't go early decision because that's binding, right? So there you go.
Thank you, AJ. And finally to University of Northern Iowa.
All right. Yes. So we have a lot of similarities to these other schools as well. So you'll note that we are also a school that uses Common App. However, we let students decide, do you want to use the Common App or would you like to use our university application? And it's really up to you what works best for you. If you're already using the Common App for other schools, then it'd be easy to add University of Northern Iowa. Otherwise, you can use the application that we have online, and it's pretty quick and easy, and might work for you as well. as far as the documents that we need to make an admission decision, it's primarily your educational transcripts, looking at the courses, looking at the grades that you've scored during your high school studies. And we are also test optional in the sense that for those of you who are native speakers of English, we do not require any sort of proof of English proficiency. So you already have that waived. Therefore, you do not need to submit an SAT or ACT for admission. You, as others have said, you can submit it. We will look at it, especially if you feel like it shows something very strong and positive about your academic skills. But if you did not have it, we could admit you. If you are a non-native speaker of English, then we do need the proof of English proficiency. And that could be IELTS, TOEFL, Duolingo, or it could be an SAT or ACT. So that is a case where I would definitely recommend a student to take SAT or ACT, because you would be able to use that for proof of English proficiency, and as well as some other scholarships. And that's why I did want to include a little bit about our scholarships, because and our costs. So this is a little bit of a breakdown of costs. I know there's a whole range of costs here in the US when you're looking at studying here, and that's a discussion you need to have with each school, understanding what their costs are, what their scholarships are, how they can help you to make sure you're finding the best fit for you. But this is an overview of our tuition and fees, housing, books and supplies, health insurance, and personal expenses. And in fact, we have been, there's some publications that do reviews, and we were named just recently one of the most affordable universities for international students. So we like the idea that we're not only a best school, but we're a best school for your money, and that's a great advantage for you. Now, having said that, I just wanted to mention that when we look at scholarships, most of our scholarships are merit-based scholarships, and most of our scholarships do not require SAT or ACT. However, there are some high merit scholarships that do require the SAT or ACT. So as you're answering that question, do I take the SAT or ACT? That's something you want to consider, that it may open you up to additional scholarships and some consideration for those. But if you don't take it, you also will be able to have some financial aid as well. So those are some of the things I wanted to share about admission at the University of Northern Iowa.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to go into a bit of a panel discussion about test optional. So I know it's already been mentioned multiple times as we talked about admissions, but would one of you, just to reiterate it for the group, like to just explain what test optional means? Someone want to raise their hand for that one? All right, AJ, go for it.
If somebody, I'll jump in part because I like to give a context of it, right? In the sense that we've all gone through a pandemic, right? It's important to know, prior to the pandemic, and when you say four-year institutions in the country, in the US at least, there's upwards of 2,000 of them, right? So there's a lot of options. Prior to the pandemic, only around 10 or 12% of all of those schools were test optional, test free, some variation of that, right? Because of the pandemic, because students physically could not sit to take it, now, about 80% of all the schools in the country are test optional, test free, some variation, right? So to that point, and really it's sort of the wild, wild west of what test optional means, right? Some schools are test optional in terms of admission, but if you want to be considered for merit-based monies or all of that, then you have to have scores and things like that. So what I tell students, and some schools, some states in the US have test requirements built into their legislation, right? So Florida, Georgia, things like you have to have a test if you're going to one of those like public schools. So I tell students, given all those differences now, there's just a lot more flexibility there, right? So it makes sense to me to take either test or both at least once, and then you have options. If you feel you can do better, take it again, by all means. If not, there's just less stress on it, in my opinion. So that's what I'll start with. At Santa Clara, again, truly test optional, no preference. We look at, if you do submit a score, it's treated as additional information, right? It doesn't really factor into sort of our rubric of decision making. It's just more context, which is what all this is.
All right. And a student asked this question. I think it's worded in a way that a lot of students think about this topic, which is how much higher are the chances of getting accepted if a student takes an SAT or ACT for a test optional school? So basically saying, if I submit that score, how is that going to positively affect my chances of getting in versus if I don't submit a score?
I can jump in here, and then my colleagues can say if there's something they have a different perspective, because again, we'll keep repeating ourselves in that every school has maybe a different approach to things. So you really do need to kind of have these conversations. But I would say in general, if we're saying that if school is test optional, then we have other avenues where we're looking at you to see if you're a student that is a good fit for our university. So I don't think that it can hurt you if you do not have a test, because we've already said we're not looking at that. However, I'm going to add this little bit. If you know that you're a borderline student and you're not sure that your scores from your academics measure up, I would say that would be an occasion where if you took an SAT or ACT and you did really well, it might help reassure a committee that, hey, this student, maybe their grades don't totally reflect what kind of student they are. It would give us another little piece to consider if you were on the borderline or we just weren't sure about your application. So that's what I would say. And again, my colleagues may have a different mindset.
Aaron, did you have anything?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's a great example of when you would want to consider submitting it or taking and submitting a test. My oldest child's in their first year of university right now. And so full disclosure, I made her take the ACT. So even though the school she is applying to, we're test optional, but then, when you're looking at the schools, like AJ mentioned earlier, you can see kind of what their middle 50% is or what their average scores are. And you can look at your score and kind of compare it. Is this going to help me with the general, in terms of the typical applicant? Is this going to make me kind of stand out with the typical applicant that this school receives? And if that's the case, then that's a great reason to send your score to that school.
And I'll just add that, so a part of what was, I think good about the pandemic in terms of what shook out in terms of how schools, looked at the tests and things like that, is that it kind of forced universities to put their money where their mouth was, because everyone has always known that there's the highest correlation of success on the test is socioeconomic. If you have the resources to do the test prep, to take the test multiple times, all of that kind of stuff. And so the students who send the scores are the students who do well, right? So you'll see that test averages for most institutions have bumped up a little bit higher because only the students who are doing very well are sending those scores. Makes sense, right? So again, what all my colleagues says, that's all correct. It really comes down to, again, if you take a test and you're looking at school X and their average is Y, should you send that score? It's really up to you, and so it's a little bit of discernment that you all need to make.
So we've seen a number of questions come through about AP and IB. So I think this is also a good opportunity, especially in the test optional environment. Can you tell students if they have AP or IB at their school, essentially, how are those looked at and how could those potentially benefit the school? Who would like to jump in first?
I'll go ahead and start with that one,
Aaron.
if that's okay. So when I was talking about the transcript being an important requirement when we don't have test scores, I was talking a little bit about determining an equivalent GPA. But the other really big piece of that we look at and put a lot of weight into really for admission and scholarship is the strength of a student's curriculum. And the AP and the IB are really the two best examples of a strong curriculum. So if you have those and have access to those types of courses and take them, that's going to help you with that component of the application review really quite a bit, at least with our school.
I'll just add the advantage also of getting advanced standing credit from both of those exams. I think it's just important to note for those of you who are laboring through IB or AP that, you know, those are from most U.S. universities, and you can ask what policies they have, or they may find it on their website, but most of us are going to give you college level credit for those exams that you pass. So that's just something that you just can plan for, and that will help you move ahead. Could save you time, could save you money on a degree, but it's definitely a positive to being part of those programs.
Can I just add, I think this circles back to a question that was asked earlier in terms of when to submit and all of that. You know, so for most schools, I think now you can self-report a score when you're applying, right? When you're going through the admission process applying. I know in our application, you can self-report your score. It's only if you say, yes, consider my scores, or admitted and then enroll, that we would ask for those actual tests, right? And really, we do that for anyone. So even if a student applies and says, no, I'm test optional, don't consider that, we wouldn't for admission purposes. If admitted, and just for institutional research purposes and all of that year-over-year data, if a student intends to enroll at the university and they've taken a test, we just ask for that, right? Just again, just it's more for data as opposed to something that you were judged, right? So hopefully that helps. But for most admission processes, self-reporting is fine if you do it within the application and all that. It's not until later that would be the actual official score.
So if you are not planning on applying to an American university, you absolutely do not need to take an SAT or ACT. If you're just planning to stay in Canada, you don't need to take one of these tests unless you just really want the experience that all those American kids go through. And I did see a question come through about athletes. So I do want to mention that the NCAA no longer needs the SAT or ACT as part of the eligibility process. Eligibility means being allowed to play sports. If you are applying through the NAIA, which is a smaller organization, you may need to submit an SAT or ACT. However, just because NCAA doesn't need it, if you do end up being recruited to a university that either requires the SAT or ACT or uses it for scholarship purposes, then you may need to take it. So what I usually recommend to athletes is that it is a good idea to consider taking a test in grade 11. It's a great recruitment tool as you're reaching out to coaches. Some of them might still ask for it if they're old school, even if it's not required anymore. And in the end, you might not need it at all. But let's say you do get recruited to a school that needs an exam. You don't want to be scrambling to take that last minute as you're also trying to finalize your recruitment. So that's the tip I typically give to athletes to make sure that you're well prepared to potentially, receive additional money or scholarships if you can through that SAT. All right, we just have 1 minute left. Does anyone have? I think we nailed most of the questions. Does anyone have any final tips as we close out here?
Relax, everybody. Take a deep breath. Again, do your research on the front end. It'll make things a lot less stressful for you. But best of luck. You got options these days.
Yeah. And I would just say, talk to us, reach out to the admission, use Education USA. There's a lot of resources for you and so many people here who want to help you and see you succeed. So use those resources and just do your best.
Amazing. I went ahead and put up another poll. So if you'd like to learn more about any of the universities that were here today, go ahead and click which schools you'd like to hear back from, and I'll give the email address that you used to register to our admissions officer for them to contact you back. So do feel free to include that if you'd like more information about Santa Clara, Miami, or University of Northern Iowa. Please give a round of applause to our fabulous panelists today. Thank you so much for the information that you provided.
Thank you.
Everyone have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.